Well, here we are again, and today we are learning or we are going through chapter 11 from the very famous book by Mark Douglas, who is an very well, I can say, accomplished trader, and he has a huge experience in the stock market and human psychology as well. So, if you are into trading, then this is your what I can say learning period. And if you are not a trader, then also it is going to help you because it is going to talk about the human psychology. And as you can see, the chapter itself, the name is Why We Need to Learn How to Adapt. Now, at this point of my life, it feels like the most appropriate thing, or it feels like the need of the hour, right? So we'll use both the languages, be it in Hindi, be it in English, like we'll go bilingual here. At times I'll use Hindi, at times I'll use English as well, right? And this book is in English itself. Now, if you're wondering why I am on chapter 11, because I have already gone through chapter 10 so far. So, yeah, that is the reason behind it. And I am starting this from here itself. See, I was journaling in the morning itself and I had three tasks in hand. And out of those three tasks, two tasks are around this only. Like, I have to make one video and I have to read up to 118 pages of this particular book, right? I have to complete 118 pages. So, yeah, my lazy ass decided to go like do it all together, right? So, that is like a shortcut or kind of hack that I have found out over here. So, let's start without any further ado. So, now, first of all, the topic itself is why we need to learn how to adapt, right? So I'll go through the reading of it because I am also reading it for the first time, and at the same time, wherever I will feel like there is a need to explain certain things in terms and experience around it, and it needs more what I can say explanation, I'll go for it. Okay. Now, there is a direct relationship between our ability to adapt to changing environment condition and the level of satisfaction we feel about our lives. Okay. So what we are trying to say is there is a direct relationship between these two. What ability to adapt and ability to adapt to changing environmental condition. This is one factor, and the other one is the level of satisfaction we feel about our lives. So they both have some relationship between each other. So that is the crux of it. Now, moving ahead, to adapt to the changes occurring in the outside environment implies that we are changing ourselves as we learn more and more of what the environment has to offer in terms of distinctions about its nature. Okay. Now, to adapt to the changes occurring to the outside environment, because that is something that is happening on the daily basis, right? There are two things. Okay, one is the outside environment, like whatever is happening around us, and one is mental environment, that is whatever emotion, whatever feelings, whatever thoughts, and whatever is going through our mind and our body. So that is mental environment that we are considering. So there is inside environment and there is outside environment. So to adapt to the changes occurring in the outside environment, right? So we can adapt, we have to adapt, right? There are certain times when we have certain things happening on the outside, but we don't have control over it. So what we can do, we can adapt to it and we can get the best out of it, right? To adapt to the changes occurring in the outside environment implies that we are changing ourselves, inner environment, changing ourselves as we learn more and more of what the environment has to offer in terms of distinction about its nature, right? Now, the more distinction we can make between the various components of the environment and how they act as a force on one another, the more information becomes available to us through our perception. Okay. As we expand our perception of information available, we'll gain a deeper level of understanding and insight into the cause and effect relationship that we have with the outside environment. That is, how the environment has the potential to act as a force on us and how the environment will react to the force of our behavior. The deeper the level of our understanding and insight, the more effectively we can interact with the environment to fulfill our needs and achieve our goals. Fulfilling our needs and achieving our goals creates within us a feeling of well-being, confidence, and satisfaction about our lives that would otherwise be characterized by feelings of dissatisfaction, disappointments, and deterioration when we can't fulfill ourselves. Right. So basically, the more we'll know about ourselves, the more we will learn how to adapt to the outer environment, the more we'll feel the good feelings, good energy, right? In terms of confidence, in terms of satisfaction, in terms of well-being. And if we'll not do it, it will go other way around. Like we can feel the disappointment, we can feel the dissatisfaction, deterioration, and these kind of stuff, right? Success, and obviously if we are learning about it, we want success in our life, we want confidence in our life, and in turn of it, we are going for the satisfaction, are all synonymous. So they are saying that success, confidence, and satisfaction, they are all synonymous, one of the same thing in some manner. They breed from one another to create and perpetuate a positive cycle of expansion and mental growth. And by the same token, disappointment, dissatisfaction, and deterioration also feed on one another to create negative cycles of emotional pain, anxiety, and depression. Okay, to fulfill our needs and achieve our goals, there has to be some level of correspondence or balance between the inner mental environment and the outer physical environment. What I mean by correspondence is some level of understanding of how the outer environment works. Our needs, intents, goals, and desires all exist first in the mental environment. Then one of the three things can happen in some future moment in the physical environment. There are either 100% fulfillment, partially fulfillment, or not fulfilled at all, resulting in feelings of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, equivalent to the degree of fulfillment. Right? If we are completely fulfilling our desires, so we'll feel satisfied. If we are doing it partially, so there will be satisfaction as well as a little bit of dissatisfaction as well. And if it is not getting fulfilled, then there will be, what I can say, dissatisfaction more and more, right? To fulfill ourselves, we need to interact with the outside environment forces. The extent to which the we fulfill ourselves is a function of knowing the most appropriate set of steps to take in a relationship to the outer condition, and to what extent we can act on what we know. Now, I'll go through it once again. To fulfill ourselves, we need to interact with the outside environment forces. The extent to which we fulfill ourselves is a function of knowing the most appropriate set of steps to take in relationship to the outer condition. Like how can we get the best out of the outer conditions, right? And to what extent we can act on or on what we know. Knowing the most appropriate set of steps to take in relationship to the prevailing condition is a function of how much or how little we have learned in relationship of what is available to be learned. Example, draw a large circle with a diameter of approximately 6 feet. This circle will represent everything that is available to be learned about the nature of the universe. Okay, let's say you draw a circle of 6 feet, and it consists of everything that you need to learn about the universe. It has everything that is present in the universe in terms of knowledge, right? Every knowledge, every information about universe is exist in this 6 feet diameter circle, or yes, circle, right? Now, not limited by what we know of it, but as it exists in every way as yet to be discovered. Okay, not just we know, but everything that is present out there in form of information. Now draw a smaller circle within the larger one with a diameter of approximately 2 feet. This smaller circle will represent all the accumulated knowledge of humankind since the dawn of our existence. Again, not the information that we have collected, but the knowledge that is collected by the humankind. So if the 6 feet is representing all the knowledge information present in the universe, then the smaller circle of what I can say, 2 feet diameter is representing whatever humankind knows, or whatever it learned, accumulated knowledge over the period of time through different kind of experiences, and uh, and experiments, whatever he did or whatever they did, basically. Right. Now, since the dawn of existence. In other words, what we have learned in relationship to what we have yet to discover about the interacting forces of our environment and ourselves. Now, place a dot within the smaller circle. This dot would probably be a fair representation of what each of us as individuals has accumulated in knowledge, insight, and understanding in relationship to what the already been discovered and learned by others, both in the past and present, in relationship to everything else that is still waiting to be discovered. I hope you're getting what point they are trying to make over here. Let me just, if I can, let's just draw it. Okay. So they are saying, let's say this is a 6 feet circle that they are talking about. This represents all the information that is present in the universe. Some of it is known to us, some of it is not unknown, like not known to us. It is unknown to us. But it represents the all the information that is present in the universe. Now, this one represents all the information, all the knowledge that humankind have accumulated from the dawn of existence. Since the time the human identity came into existence, this is what we have acquired. Now, this dot, small dot inside of it, simply represents what we know. So, this is what they are trying to say over here. Okay. Now, moving ahead. So you can simply understand how much we have still to, discover, and how much we have to know about the things and stuff. Now, is it necessary? Maybe not, but to get the best out of the situation, we need to, go through it. So that is the basic idea behind it. Like, accumulate as much information as possible so that you can, you know utilize it to the fullest to get the best out of the situation that is present around you in the outer environment and in your life as well, so that you'll live a life full of satisfaction, confidence, and success. The empty space between the inside boundaries of the larger circle and the smaller circle is basically everything we don't know. So this is what we are talking about, right? This, the space between this boundary and this boundary, this whole represents the things that we don't know, right? And the smaller circle is basically everything we don't know or haven't learned about yet, either individually or collectively. There are many things in the environment available to be experienced. However, until we learn about them, we don't experience them. Just as people couldn't experience atomic energy until it was discovered, yet it existed in the environment, waiting to be experienced and learned about for the hundreds of thousands of years we before we actually discovered it. There were hidden components that had to be actively uncovered by someone. Otherwise, if the environment acts as a force on us is in ways that we haven't learned to understand yet, we will either dismiss the experience as not real to form some superstition, or think of it as some unknown or random force until we investigate and understand the phenomena, right? So till the time we don't know about it, we call it as, superstition, or we call it as something that is random, or sometimes we even term it as magic, right? What is magic? Most of the time, even people say they are committing they are doing magic and stuff, but in reality, is it really magic, or they are just doing certain thing that is not known by us? They're showing some tricks and we don't know the logic behind it. It's basically that. We call it in Hindi, we call it like hi hath ki sabai and stuff, right? So basically, that's why we need to know about things. Otherwise, we will fall into this loop of superstition and unknown or random force, right? We'll just try to say this is something that is not known to us. Correct. Until we investigate and understand the phenomena. When we investigate, we learn to make enough distinctions to recognize all the interacting components acting as a force on one another to create the effect that we also believed was random until we learned about the experiences. For years, many people in the academic community believed that the markets were random. This is a perfect example of their general lack of understanding of human nature. Even now, also, that's the irony, right? Stock market is still termed as Satta Bajar, even now. Satta Bajar, right? That itself means a place where we gamble because people don't have the knowledge behind it. People don't know, you know, things about it. And for them, it is like something that is unknown. So they are either perceiving it as a gambling place, or whoever is doing it, they either perceive that person as a gambler, right? So for many years, many people in the academic community believed that the markets were random. Even in the like in earlier times, even the people from the academic community also believed that the markets were random. This is a perfect example of the general lack of understanding of human nature. People act as a force on prices is perfectly logical ways when you understand the logic of their fears. The small circle represents what has been discovered and experienced by somebody at some times in human history. All the discovery throughout human history has expanded the small circle to include more and more of the larger one. For example, okay, let me just keep it a little bit side. I'll use this one, or maybe this one. Okay. For example, the small circle would probably have been a tenth of its all the discovery throughout sometimes. Okay, maybe I need. All right, just give me a moment. Hmm. Huh. So from here I have to run, right? Okay. The small circle represents that what has been discovered and experienced by somebody at sometimes in human history. All the discovery throughout human history have expanded the smaller circle to include more and more of the larger one. For example, the small circle would probably have been a tenth of its size, present size during the Middle Ages. Each discovery since then changed the environment that we could experience because it added something to the mental environment that didn't previously exist in it. In other words, as we learned, we changed the way we perceive the world around us, resulting in the evolution of the thinking of the humankind overall. There is no question that the accumulated knowledge of humankind has increased to levels that would be completely inconceivable to or boggle the mind of even the broadcast most progressive thinking person alive just 100 years ago. Everything that exists now that didn't exist then, cars, planes, phones, computer, etc., is a result of what someone learned and shared with others. And consequently, it changed the consistency and makeup of the environment we live in. And yet, all of that we have now existed as possibilities since the beginning of humankind. The possibility of manned space flight existed from the first moment that a person looked up into a starlit sky and wondered what it would be like to be on the moon. Of course, we didn't even attempt to do it until our knowledge evolved to a point where mere wishing could be turned into a reality. But what if we could go back to 1889 and tell the typical 40-year-old person about the world their great grandchildren will grow up in? There is no way he would believe how different things will be. He wouldn't believe it because he wouldn't have the mental framework to believe it. Just like we would have a very difficult time believing that we will have evolved into 100 years from now. The dot simply represents the word we experience as individuals in relationship to what would be possible to experience if we had inside of our mental environment all the accumulated knowledge of humankind. Everything you and I know as individuals in relationship to everything we haven't learned yet would represent the current set of limitation that we operate from. That is, all our individual accumulated knowledge, every memory, belief, distinction, association, insight, or understanding about the nature of the physical environment would all represent our personal limitation compared to what is available in the environment to experience, believe, and understand. That is, there will always be more information available in the environment than what our personal limitation will allow us to perceive or experience. So never say that I know it all, because when you are saying that I know it all, then you are even closing the possibility to learn something new, to understand something new, right? So you're just closing that opportunity for yourself. That is bad for yourself. So that is what we are trying to say over here. That is, there will always be information available in the environment than what our personal limitation will allow us to perceive or experience. Just contemplate the immensity of what we don't know yet. Consider that every person who exists act as a force on the environment to change it in some way that can affect us as individuals in some gratifying or unsatisfying way. The way in which each individual act as a cause to change the environment, which in turn affects everyone else, will correspond to the makeup of his mental environment. So until you and I understand every fact, every facet of everyone's everyone else's behavior and the ways in which they can express themselves to act as a force on the environment, meaning the rest of us, then every other person that exists would represent an unknown outside force in the extent to the extent that we haven't learned about human nature or understand it, right? We could start feeling in the small circle with dots to represent the knowledge of each individual that exists in the planet on the planet until the circle was almost filled. The blank space left in the small circle would represent knowledge that exists in some form that is not inside the mind of some person alive today. We would we could also organize the dots into clusters where each dot would overlap a bit to represent the shared knowledge and beliefs of different cultures, although they couldn't overlap too much because we all know something different because of our individual differences in experiences. The dots would also have to be different sizes to represent the increase or decrease levels of understanding and insight that we operate out of in relationship to one another. For example, the dot of a child would be much smaller than the dot of a typical adult. The physical environment was here. before we were born, and we certainly weren't born with the insight that we need to interact with it in such a way that we can assure ourselves of experiencing high levels of satisfaction. For example, if there was 100% correspondence between our mental and physical environment, then everything there is to know about the nature of the physical environment we would have already learned, and this knowledge would be component part of the mental environment. Implied within the perfect correspondence would be a complete understanding of all the forces that operate in the physical environment, coupled with a complete understanding of their cause and effect relationship. We would know exactly how the environment would act as a force on us to create experience, and how the environment would respond as a counteracting force to the force we apply to it through our behavior. And therefore, with a perfect understanding, we would know the most appropriate set of steps to take to fulfill our needs, intents, goals, and desires, resulting in a complete state of satisfaction. I am defining behavior as the outward physical expression of mental energy acting as a force on the outside environment. Obviously, none of us possesses this kind of perfect correspondence with the environment, and as a result, it is probably safe to say that none of us lives our lives in a complete state of satisfaction. However, the more we understand and know about the interacting force behind our own behavior and the interacting environmental forces outside of us, the easier it is to fulfill our needs and achieve our goals, resulting in greater levels of satisfaction that we will experience in our lives. Conversely, if we don't understand our own behavior, we certainly can't begin to understand or anticipate anyone else's. And the less we understand and know about the rest of the environment components that have a potential to act as a human on us, as a force on us, then it would stand to reason that the less potential we have to fulfill our needs and achieve our goals, resulting in feelings of disappointment, stress, anxiety, happiness, and fear. Learning and the quality of our experiences. As I have mentioned, we aren't born with the knowledge that we need to operate effectively in the physical environment to fulfill ourselves. However, we are born with the need to know. This need to know operates as a driving force in our lives, coming from the innermost depths of who we are, our natural sense of. Okay, just give me 1 second. I need to, take a little bit back support and stuff. Just 1 second. Sorry for the inconvenience caused. Like the cliche line that I'm using over here. Right? Like the everyone, even though they don't feel it, they say sorry for the inconvenience caused. Right. Okay. Let's just go ahead. As I have mentioned, we aren't born with the knowledge that we need to operate effectively in the physical environment to fulfill ourselves. However, we are born with a need to know. This need to know operates as a driving force in our lives, coming from the innermost depths of who we are. Our natural sense of curiosity compels us to explore and learn. For example, once we have learned the nature of something and accomplished some task, we quickly become bored and go on to something different. Boredom acts as an inner force compelling us to look for something new to discover and learn about. Attraction also acts as an inner force compelling us to move through the environment to discover and create experience. Take the object of a child's curiosity, something he is attracted to, away from him, and what will happen? He will usually start crying or even throw a fit. His crying is an indication that his inner needs are not being fulfilled. Crying is a form of grieving to compensate for the lack of balance between the inner and outer environments. When we have explored the object of our attention to our satisfaction, it means the insight has been filled with what the outside has to offer in terms of experience. What then, when that happens, we simply lose interest, become bored, and start to scan the environment for something else that might attract our attention. Now, you can relate to this part in current society in a lot of ways, even in terms of relationships as well, right? Same guy, like if I can just simply give you an example, boys dating pattern, what they generally do, right? I'm not saying I'm the one also following it, but yeah, I have seen and have even tried, but it is something that I was not able to do, right? So what they do, they will get attracted by a woman or a female counterpart, or like let's say a random stranger also for that matter. They got attracted by the physical attire or like physical beauty and stuff. Now it generates curiosity in their mind, and now they want to get that girl, right? Come in relationship with her, or like, get her in some sense. to accomplish, because this is something that is generating curiosity in their mind, and this is something new experience for them, right? Because every individual is different. Now they are getting attracted by the outer beauty. Now they'll go all in. They will even try to portray themselves as the person they are not. And after getting that girl, like, let's say they played their card, like he played their, or boys generally, they played their cards right, and now they are in relationship with this girl. Now over the period of time they will start getting bored from the same person, exactly same person, with the same physical attributes, with the same physical, attractiveness and everything. Now once they have, you know got that person, they accomplished it, which is a wrong way to portray it, but yes, it is in most of the time. Once they accomplished it, over the period of time they will start getting bored from it. They will start feeling it as a burden, and ultimately they will start looking for some other options. But at the same time they can not directly confront the person or the other person that, okay, now I'm getting bored of it, or like it's something that I'm taking for granted and stuff. They can't do it, right? Because that is also something that requires courage to do in one way or another. And people, they just want to be in that shell, they just want to be in that closet, they just want to be in their comfort zone, right? So they will not confront, so they will go for the easier option, that is cheating. It can be of two levels, physical and mental. So mental cheating is something that is like, if the person is not having a very good hold on their thoughts, then mental cheating is something that is more like a intrusive thoughts. So it can happen to some extent, like the extent can vary from person to person. If it is happening on a very large extent, then it is a problem, but in small extent it can happen, right? Now coming to the physical cheating part, it is more or less like what I can say. If we'll do it, we'll get to know, like they are getting the curiosity from some other person. Let's say X got attracted by Y initially, and he came in relationship with this Y. Now they are both together, X and Y are together. Now X got, let's say, used to of Y, or let's say X got, what I can say, like he's not curious anymore to know about Y because he already accomplished her, right? Now X is now getting attracted to A. Let's say there is another one, A. X and Y still are in relation, but now X is getting attracted to A. Now he'll do the same thing for A till the time he is not getting, like in terms of relationship and stuff with A now, right? At the same time, X is not telling Y about it. He's just pretending, or he's just, coping through the procedure and stuff. So that is also something that is happening. Now, this is a typical classical example of cheating. I'm not justifying it any sense. It is wrong, completely, utterly wrong. But yeah, this is how it is happening. This is one of the major reason behind it, right? Now coming back to the chapter itself. Now why I took this example, because it is more catchy and it is more relatable to most of the audience out there, and it is easier to understand it in that manner. Now there is another characteristics of our nature that supports our need to learn. Wherever Whenever we learn a skill, the steps involved in the operation of that skill drop down to an unconscious level of operation. So we are then free to learn something new. To learn a skill, we usually have to break the skill down into a series of small steps and concentrate on each individual steps until we can put all the steps together into a series of effective movements. By concentrating on each small step, we narrow our focus of our attention to the point where we are oblivious to anything else going on in the environment. Now, like we are not getting bothered by what is happening in the environment. For example, think of a time in your life when you were trying to learn a new skill, say in some sport, and while you were trying to put all the moments together, someone was attempting to get your attention on some completely unrelated matter. In such a situation, we would find it extremely difficult, if not possible, to stay focused on one without destroying our concentration on the other. However, after we have successfully made the skill as a learned resource, we could easily perform the movements while focusing our attention elsewhere, right? We are doing things subconsciously. A common example of it, when learn how to ride or what I can say, bike, or bicycle or motorbike or whatever it is, right? Or for an example, when you start to drive a car, at that time you require a lot of focus. You need to learn about how it actually works, and how to take the actions whenever it is needed, like how to take turn, how to manage steering, how to go in this particular direction, how to use indicator, front light, whatever it is, right? All the technicals and stuff. In the beginning you put a lot of efforts in, you learned that particular skill, the riding and all. And over the period of time, now let's say you learned that particular skill and now you're riding the bike for a longer time, let's say 2 3 years, and you decided to go from X point to Y. Now you're doing it subconsciously because everything is present in your mind, like how to operate a motorbike and how to go from a place to other place and how to handle the situation. You're doing it subconsciously, you're not even paying attention to it. So most of the time it is like that. And at the same time, while you're riding the bike, you're completely focused on a phone call, for an example. You're completely talking to some relatives or some known person of yours, and you're completely indulged in that, but at the same time you're riding a bike as well. So in most of the cases you'll easily able to maneuver through traffic and all the kind of obstacles that is coming in on the way. You'll easily able to do that. So that is what we are trying to say. Like initially you need to put a lot of attention to learn a skill, but over the period of time, once you are acquired that particular skill, you can go through that skill along with focusing on something else, right? Now, without this characteristics of our nature, where our skills drop to an unconscious level of operation, we would find it nearly impossible to move beyond the performance level of a typical infant. Just think what it would be like if we had to concentrate on all the moments necessary just to pick something up the way a typical infant does. We didn't always have the eye hand coordination. Eye hand coordination is something that I'm trying to say. Most of the time, when you're going from one place to another, you reach the, let's say, A to B, but you don't know exactly how you go through the traffic. And most of the time, even if you're thinking about some other stuff, I'm telling you this sheer, like I am telling you this from my experience only. So this is what happens to me. I don't know about you all, like how it works for everyone else, but I'm guessing it is how it is. Now, we didn't always have the eye hand coordination that we take completely for granted. We had to learn it. We learned it because we were attracted to things in the environment we wanted to experience with our senses of touch. As we learn each skill, we can automatically access the series of movements to execute the skill, so we don't have to concentrate on any of the individual steps, which then free our attention to explore and continually expand what we can become aware of. Learning is a function of our existence. It will occur quite naturally through our powerful sense of curiosity and what we find ourselves attracted to in the environment that we just need to know everything about. At the most fundamental level, learning will happen just because we are alive and have to interact with the environment to stay alive. So we will learn something. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that what we have learned is very useful and respect to how we might go about fulfilling ourselves in some satisfactory way. We have very little control in our early years over what we learn about the nature of the outside world and how it works. I'll discuss this in more detail in a moment as we expand our personal dot as in the example to learn more and more of the what the environment has to offer in the way of insight about itself. We increase our level of correspondence with it. When we learn, we change the makeup and consistency of our inner environment. Each change we make on the inside simultaneously changes our perspective and perception of the outside. The outside environment is different because we are operating out of new insight and understanding as a result of what has been added to or changed on the inside. Each new insight makes available to us new and different choices on how to interact more appropriately with the environment to change the quality of our experiences. This may seem like an obvious correlation between what we have learned and how much satisfaction we experience in our lives, but I assure you it is not. If it was so obvious, then most people wouldn't have such a difficult time making the connection between the deteriorating conditions, lack of happiness or satisfaction in their lives, and their lack of insight, coupled with the refusal of knowledge, acknowledge there is something they don't know and need to learn. There are always greater levels of satisfaction available in every experience until we reach the point where we know everything there is to know. If we did not if we did know everything there is to know, we could expect outcomes from the outside that would correspond exactly with the inside mental environment. This kind of perfect correspondence between inner and outer would be the result of our perfect understanding of ourselves. The inner forces that act on our behavior in relationship to the outer environmental forces that act on us. Since none of us is at the level of perfect knowledge, we can assume that within every experience we have with physical environment, there are other probable experience resulting from other choices that were available but unknown to us at the time. The point being that what we end up with in any given situation will correspond exactly with our level of understanding, insight, and ability to act on what we know. The more we allow ourselves to learn, the better able we are at making assessment about the possibility that exist in some future moment. However, implied with the foregoing statement is that we are first willing to acknowledge that other possible futures exist, right? So you need not to be very rigid about what you know and your beliefs and stuff. There needs to be an open openness towards the new experiences and towards the possible futures, and towards the other possible ways as well, not just the one future that our expectation and belief about what we have already learned lock us into. Keep in mind that everything we know in relationship to everything we haven't learned yet would represent the current set of limitation that we operate out of. Conceptually, these individual limitations are no different from the choices people in the Middle Ages were blinded to by believing that the earth was flat. If we aren't willing to acknowledge that in any given situation more information and choices exist than what our beliefs allow us to perceive, then we'll never learn to recognize or anticipate the existence of these other more satisfying possibilities. By acknowledging the possibility that a more appropriate set of steps exist, we open ourselves up to perceive and then learn the steps that can lead to greater levels of satisfaction. Refusing to acknowledge the existence of these possibilities would be same as claiming that electricity didn't exist before it was discovered. When we continually argue for the status quo by defending what we already believe we know, the environment will seem to be constantly assaulting us, resulting in feelings of stress and anxiety. The outer environment becomes assaulting because it is offering us more to learn about the nature of the ways in which things exist, and we are simply refusing to learn. In fact, we can easily determine if we need to learn something to operate in the environment more effectively by just monitoring the way we feel. If there were never an imbalance on or lack of correspondence between the mental and the physical environments, then theoretically we wouldn't ever have a reason to feel disappointment, frustration, confusion, stress, or anxiety. It is only because there is an imbalance, a lack of harmony or correspondence between the mental and physical, that we never experience any of these unpleasant negative emotions, because when there is a balance between the inside and outside, we experience the opposite feelings of joy, happiness, and satisfaction. So it would stand to reason that anytime we feel these negative emotion, it is because we either didn't know the most appropriate set of steps, resulting in frustration and disappointment, or we don't know what to do next, resulting in stress, anxiety, and confusion. In any case, our feelings will always tell us about the state of our relationship with the environment and point the way to what we need to learn to experience a greater degrees of satisfaction. For example, if we aren't experiencing satisfaction in our personal relationship, would it be too simple to assume that the reason is because we haven't developed the appropriate interpersonal skills? Is it possible that there are certain communication skills available that once learned and used can result in much more satisfying personal relationship and deeper level of intimacy? The problem is that it is just as easy to assume that the appropriate skills leading to greater levels of satisfaction don't exist, or that we already know what we need to know, and if we aren't experiencing satisfaction now, it must therefore not be possible to experience it at all. When we operate out of the last assumption, even if the environment present us with the evidence that deeper level of satisfaction are possible, observing another couple who are experiencing satisfaction, we would probably assume that they are acting as if they are happy of appearance's sake. That way, we won't have to take responsibility for learning something new, something they might know. The first assumption would result in investigation, learning, and expansion, leading to greater level of effectiveness and satisfaction. The last two assumption would obviously lead to more dissatisfaction. The names and places may change, but we will experience the same kind of painful condition over and over again. These cycles of dissatisfaction will continue until we acknowledge there is something that we need to learn and go about the task of learning it. Right? What we already know will block what we haven't learned yet. Very, very, very important. Obviously, acknowledging there is something that we need to learn is not as easy as it sounds. In fact, acknowledging that we don't know something, or something, or that what we do know isn't very useful or effective presents us with one of the major paradoxes of life. The dilemma we are confronted with is how we know what we don't know, when what we have already learned will block our perception of what we haven't learned yet. For example, once we learn that trading is easy, the first few quick winning trades will establish that that belief. It will block our perception of information to the contrary, that trading is probably one of the hardest endeavors one could choose to undertake. Each of these beliefs, that trading is easy or trading is hard, would result in the perception of completely different choices as being available from the environment, resulting in very different outcomes based on the choices perceived and acted on. We don't question the usefulness or effectiveness of something we have already learned, simply because what each of us has learned we experience in some way. That is, we won't question what we have experienced just because we experienced it, meaning the reality of the experience is based on five senses. What is inside of us, we either felt, saw, heard, smelled, or tasted. That's real enough. One Once an experience becomes a component part of our mental environment in the form of memory, belief, or association, it becomes a part of what is commonly believed to be our identity and beyond question. However, we are open to learn practically anything the environment has to offer if we haven't been previously exposed in some way. We'll soak up first time information like sponge, regardless of what it is. However, once it is inside of us, we'll either defend it or defend against it, hide from information in the environment that we don't want to acknowledge as a part of our mental environment, instead of making ourselves available to learn more of what the environment has to offer in the way of insight about itself or ourselves, as the case may be. To defend against the intrusion of information requires energy. This investment is energy is commonly referred to as stress. The simplest definition that I can think of for stress is that it is what we feel when we are actively blocking information from the environment. In physical terms, stress is really no different from walking against the wind. Symbolically, the wind would represent various categories of environmental information we don't want to confront. Our bodies walking against the wind would represent what we have already learned, what is already inside of us, what blocks what is inside of us, that blocks what is inside outside of us. The two forces clash and we feel stress. One of the biggest ironies of life is that everyone wants to be right. In other words, everyone assumes what they have experienced and learned about the nature of the way things exist to be true and correct version. The irony is everyone's version is correct by virtue of the fact that what is inside all of us was experienced by our physical senses. If we saw it, if we read it, if we heard it, if we felt it, if we have tasted it, if we smelled it, or any combination thereof, we experienced it. However, not everybody's version of what the environment has to offer in the way of experiences is particularly useful or effective as a resource for interacting with the environment in a way that would lead to satisfactory outcomes. Just because something gets input into our mental environment doesn't mean that it's of any real value in helping us to fulfill ourselves. A child has no way of conceptualizing how his experiences are forming beliefs about the nature of reality, concept that would in fact be much different under different environmental condition. He unquestionably takes an experience as a fact of reality because the beliefs he is forming are founded in feelings and emotion. He does not reflects on his experiences to assess the quality of the beliefs he is forming. He has no way of determining how these beliefs will either act as a resources or obstacles to self-expression in the future. The child doesn't understand that any belief that he forms will define reality in a way that excludes other possibilities, or that he will make association with experiences, lumping components of the environment together in ways that are very limiting and not practical. Many of these beliefs will just naturally be decharged as his attraction cause him to interact with the environment in new ways. All of us will just naturally grow into a set of limitation as we expand our awareness by learning, which in turn releases us from the things we used to believe. However, if the quality of the energy in many of our beliefs is negatively charged, then our fear will act as an obstacle to self-expression, limiting what we can perceive from the environment as possibility. For example, someone who grew up constantly being belittled or criticized by his parents knows exactly how that feels. The beliefs he forms about himself and his relationship with the environment as a result were formed in a reality of pain. Certainly, he would know while growing up that he was forming a belief about the relative unworthiness or as a person. Unworthiness is a concept that he may not learn about well into his adult years, and the may and he may never learn how to release himself from the damaging effects. But in the meantime, his fear of being ridiculed and belittled will drastically limit the possibility he perceives in the environment for self expression. Many possibilities that seem self evident to someone without the sphere would be totally out of the realm of possibility for him. And even bigger irony is that the more we acknowledge the possibility that our version is of the way things exist isn't as effective of a resource as it could be, the more we make ourselves available to learn from the environment by expanding our personal dot to include more of what is outside of us inside of us, the more it increases our level of correspondence with the outside, leaving less and less of what is out there that we don't know about, thereby increasing our ability to be right. The more we allow ourselves to learn, the better able we are at making assessments about the possibilities, probabilities that exist in some future moment. How could we not be better off by learning something when you consider that the environment can act as a force on us in an almost infinite variety of ways, some of which we know about, many others we couldn't begin to anticipate unless we keep on learning in spite of what we already know. The more we believe we know, the more we make the environment prove to us that what we know isn't particularly useful or effective. The problem is that proof could be right in front of our noses, and we wouldn't have the mental framework to recognize it unless we willingly allowed ourselves to confront it and consider it. Otherwise, if we all knew so much, we wouldn't experience emotional pain because it is perfect indication that we don't know how to interact with the environment to our satisfaction. Because if we did, we would. All this should be somewhat apparent because it is not a typical human characteristic to actively gather and consider information that conflicts with what we already know and believe to be true. However, consider that hidden within the environmental information that we haven't learned to perceive yet, either because we haven't learned to make the appropriate distinction or because the information is being blocked by our current set of beliefs, are a more appropriate set of steps to fulfilling ourselves. What we haven't learned yet is outside of each of us, waiting to become part of our personal dot. What we don't know represents all the information that could exist, that could result in choices that have more satisfying outcomes. However, since we okay, I got like zoned out in between. I'll have to read it again. Okay, with what we already know and believe to be true, however, consider that hidden within the environmental information that we haven't learned to perceive yet, either because we haven't learned to make the appropriate distinction or because the information is being blocked by our current set of beliefs, or a more appropriate set of steps to fulfilling ourselves. What we haven't learned yet is outside of each one of us waiting to become a part of our personal dot. What we don't know represents all the information that could result in choices that have much more satisfying outcomes. However, since we can't know what we haven't learned yet, and what we do know blocks the perception of other alternatives that exist for satisfaction, we easily get caught in these terribly unsatisfying life cycles, believing that is all the world has to offer where when our predicament is merely the result of our inability to adapt ourselves. When we do allow ourselves to adapt, we learn that there are always more choices available than our beliefs will allow us to perceive. What I mean by adapt is to identify and actively change something that is already inside of us, so there is a higher degree of correspondence between the inside and outside. Each first time experience with the mental environment creates a distinction in the mental environment about its nature. All information or possibility that exist in the same category as the first experience will then be filtered perceptually through what we learned from that experience. Again, I'll use the example of a child whose first experience with a dog is a painful one, meaning that the first dog the child attempted to play with, out of his natural sense of curiosity, bit him. As a result of his experience, the child will naturally associate all dogs with the one that bit him. What he learned will then act as a mental barrier to anything else the environment may have to offer with respect to all other dogs. Now, this might sound very ironical, but this, directly as soon as I read it, that sent me into the zone where, all females are like, some females are saying that all men are dogs, right? All men are dogs, basically. So, why they're saying it? Because whatever experience they had in past with a man is not the way they desired for, is not the way they aspired to have, right? So now there is this generalization or general perception against men that all men are dog, and they are not just, you know labeling or generalizing a gender, but at the same time they are just simply closing the very possibility where they can find someone who is perfectly apt for them, right? Because they are thinking all men are dogs, so they will not be able to consider the mere possibility to go and have any kind of association with any man in that manners. They can not go all in, right? It can be other way around as well. Most of the time, I have heard males saying that you know girls cheat, and this is the common conception that is going on in all the males around me, that girls generally they do cheat, right? And they will leave you basically. So yeah, that is one of the example of generalization. Now, I have seen in certain female and their Instagram bio they have put as misandrist. Misandrist is someone who has a strong hatred towards male. Now, how they lead to it, I don't know, but this is the reason, or this is the reasoning that I can come up with behind, you know, saying like themselves as misandrist. So yeah, it is what it is. I think misandrist is the word, right? If I'm mispronouncing it, it is a similar sounding word then. Most probably I am pronouncing it correctly. Right? Basically a person who has a strong hatred towards male as a gender and men in general. Now, hmm, I have used the words naturally associate to point out that the child will not have the actively thinking, like now the child will not have to actively think about the limiting way in which dogs will characterize in his mental environment. The association will occur automatically as a natural function of the way our minds are wired. So he will not have to see the dog that bit him. Any dog will cause him to remember the pain of his previous experience. As a result of his first experience with the dog being painful, he'll automatically associate any future encounters with dogs with his one painful experience, regardless of how erroneous erroneous his association is, or how the environment may try to prove to him that most dogs are friendly and will not cause him pain. He won't believe it, because what he has already learned about dogs, not one dog, but all dogs, will cause him to block the acceptance of this new information into the mental system. However, if the child's first experience with the dog is positive, he'll obviously have no reservation to play with any dog until he has a painful experience. In this case, however, if he is bitten, he'll not automatically okay, that is how it is getting pronounced at my neighborhood, right? So automatically. It is like the Hindi version of automatically. Okay. Now, automatically associate all other dogs with the one that bet him, because he has already learned that the environment has more to offer than this one painful experience. When he will learn, what he'll learn that is new for him is that not all dogs are friendly, and that he must use some caution when interacting with them until he can determine their disposition. Now, the child whose first experience was painful doesn't know that he can experience happiness and joy with dogs. He doesn't know it because he hasn't experienced it. It isn't something he has learned yet, regardless of the evidence the environment may be representing him. Nor will he likely learn it until he is willing to step through his fear. All other information being offered to him about the nature of dogs will be blocked or rejected by the energy of what he has already learned. You can teach a child anything you please, regardless of how erroneous or dysfunctional it is related to the environmental conditions. The child will believe that what you teach him, because what he experiences become a part of his identity. Anything we experience will become a functional part of our identity. When I say functioning, now I mean that once something is inside of us, regardless of what it is, it then has the potential to act as a force on our behavior. All these functioning parts that we call memories of experience, beliefs, and association in turn then act as an internal force to shape our perception of the environment we experience out of what is available to experience. As you already know, what each of us fears as individuals is something that we have at some point in our lives learned to fear. As you already know, what each of us fears as individuals is something that we have at some point in our lives learned to fear. As a result of our experiences, when we feel fear, it is because we have learned to perceive the environmental condition as threatening in some way. Whereas someone who hasn't had a painful experience associated with the environment condition is a completely different way, a way that corresponds with his previous experience. One person can perceive the condition as a threat, the other as an opportunity in the same moment, based on what is already inside of them. In other words, what they have already taken into their mental framework. Environment as experience will determine how they perceive the environmental condition, whether as an opportunity to experience joy or as a threat to experience pain, and all the degree in between. What is really interesting is that neither one would be able to convince the other of the validity of this perception, because what they are experiencing at the moment is directly related to what they have already learned. We'll usually only question the value of something that is inside of us if we are forced to, as an absolute last resort. What would be the ultimate proof that we need to finally make acknowledge that there is something we need to learn? Pain. We will acknowledge that the need to learn when we are experiencing the emotional pain of a great disappointment or stress and anxiety, because we don't know what to do next, and we are finding it increasingly difficult to shift the responsibility for what we are ending up with. Now, this is the part where I can relate to the most. So I am someone who had this experience of procrastinating things till the very end and then doing it. It might be because of the mental framework. In the past I have had experiences in which you know I worked, I enjoyed all the time, and at the very last moment, under pressure, I completed a particular thing and it turned out to be just completely fine. And then from that part onwards, it became a general habit that I have. Right now, when exactly we will acknowledge there are certain things that needs to be changed inside of us, that is a part of our personality. When there will be pain, it can be emotional pain most of the time, and I am feeling it as of now. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm taking steps to do certain things for a better good in future. If we go back to the believing what to do next, and we are finding it increasingly difficult to shift the responsibility for what we are ending up with. If we go back to the believing that trading is easy example, why would we consider that trading is difficult when we already know that it is easy? What would cause us to question the usefulness of such a belief? The emotional pain of disappointment as a result of not being able to achieve our goals. Exactly true. On point. Once we question the usefulness, what happens? A whole world of information opens up to us on how we can learn to interact with the trading environment more effectively by increasing our level of correspondence. However, everything we would find in the environment to increase our understanding already existed. Unless we think of something completely new on our own, the only thing that stopped us from finding it before was the energy of what we already knew, blocking that we haven't learned yet. The problem is that if learning something new means that we have to change what we have already learned, we instinctively seem to refuse to do it, regardless of how inappropriate what we have learned may be related to what we would know need to know to experience satisfaction. Once we have learned something, it will act as a force to block other information that would result in the perception of other choices. Even children will resist the acceptance of information that is contrary to what they have already learned, regardless of how dysfunctional their knowledge may be. All learning is synonymous with change, whether we are changing something we already know or learning something completely new. If we refuse to change, adapt the inside, adding to what we know to create more distinction and change our perspective, then we are not learning what we need to know to experience something different in the outer environment. If there is no change in the inside, there will be no perceived change in the outside, thereby locking us into recurring cycles of pain and dissatisfaction. What's more, we will continue to suffer until the pain becomes so great that we are left with no choice other than to reassess how we go about managing our lives. That is, reassessing the usefulness of our beliefs. What we do know becomes obsolete. Besides the cycles of dissatisfaction that our current set of limitation locks us into, you just give me 1 second. Hmm, I do know this, but just for getting the confirmation. Okay. Okay, understood. All right. What we do know becomes obsolete. Besides the cycles of dissatisfaction that our current set of limitation locks us into, what we know blocks what we haven't learned yet. There is an even more practical reason for learning how to adapt. All of us are forced to interact with the constantly changing physical environment to fulfill our needs and achieve our goals. The way we interact with the environment, what choices we perceive in relationship to what is actually available from the environment's perspective, and what we do in relationship to what we perceive are all a function of what we have learned. Now, if you will recall, everything that constitutes the physical environment is in constant motion. Anything that is in motion, which includes everything made of atoms and molecules, is also changing over period of time over time. So change is an automatic function of the physical environment. Great. However, the mental environment is composed of positively or negatively charged energy that carries information about our experiences. What we have learned that forms into organizational pattern that we call beliefs had and concepts about the nature of the physical environment. Energy is not made of atoms and molecules and therefore does not change over time. In fact, energy exists in a non-physical dimension outside of time as we perceive it within with our senses. Electrical energy or chemically produced electrical energy can be stored just the same way in a battery, and the information it carries is stored with it. That is, time has no effect on the quality of this energy, the degree of the positive or negative charge, and the ways in which it affects our perception of environment and environmental information and how it acts as a force on our behavior. Changing our mental environment to correspond with the constant external changes going on in the physical environment is not automatic. The information stored in our mental environment about the nature of the physical environment can remain unchanged for years or a lifetime for what matter, regardless of how outdated, useful, useless, or even harmful it may be. And furthermore, this outdated knowledge will continue to act as a force on our behavior, causing us to interact with the environment in completely inappropriate ways related to the condition. So, even if we are experiencing satisfaction in certain areas of life, we cannot take it for granted that the condition that we have learned to interact with will stay as we know them to exist. The outside conditions are in constant motion, presenting us with different forces to learn about and adapt to. In the market environment, for example, the changes in condition are highly visible and usually moment to moment, whereas in other types of environment, the that we typically operate in, the forces of changes work as a little slower and are less visible, but they are changing nevertheless. The problem is that the condition will change and we won't necessarily recognize these changes even if we start to experience some degree of dissatisfaction, unless we are constantly vigilant that even though we have learned something that works, it can still become obsolete. Okay, all right. So this chapter is over and we have already reached like completed 118 pages. So our task for the day is done. Now, what I have learned, if quickly summarize what I have learned in this chapter. So we have to accept or adapt the surrounding information. We have to be open enough to grasp whatever the environment has to offer. We should not be completely rigid about whatever experience we had in past, and we should never think the knowledge that we acquire is the only knowledge or is the way we are acting is the only way to act in a current condition. We should not be, so self-centered. We should not be so closed in our beliefs and stuffs. We need to be open into learning things so that we can, you know we cannot have the experiences of past which might be obsolete now, can hamper our satisfaction in future. So basically be open to new experiences, be open to new information, and adapt and choose the best out of them to get the best out of life, to get the success, confidence, and the satisfaction. So yeah, that's the basic crux. All right, so we'll stop recording right on. I think it's already like 12:18. We have already, if I'm not wrong, I have like taken around 1 hour. Okay, let's see how it goes. So thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Thank you, universe. Thank you, Radharanji. Peace out. Have fun.